Kia ora and welcome to PostingCast. This evening, I have decided to melt the brains of two of New Zealand's finest prospective parliamentary Green candidates. I am joined by Steph Rodgers and Francisco Hernandez. Hi guys, how you going?
Worse now that I've watched that film again for the first time since I was like 14.
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm not too bad. I'm just thinking the last movie that we watched on the podcast was myself, Charlie, and Cass watching The Crimes of Grindelwald. And that
Oh,
episode was so bad that we went off air for a year,
It was a
effectively.
great episode, though, as someone who didn't have to watch the movie and still hasn't watched the movie. Fantastic episode.
Yeah, I'll be getting Cass and Charlie back on at some point to apologize in a full and honest and open manner for how we treated them. So, the year is 1996, which is kind of like the high point of that weird post-Soviet 90s. Hey, history's ended and everything's going to be fine now, guys. Bill Clinton gets re-elected. America's doing great and everyone feels good about themselves. The only issue is if you're someone like Andrew Davis, the director of this movie, you hate this. You hate the idea that the world is a nice place. So you have made a series of movies about institutional blowback in some ways. So Davis is responsible for the excellent Under Siege.
hmm
It's not excellent because it's got
Steven Seagal.
Steven Seagal. Yeah, it's excellent because it's got Tommy Lee Jones in. He's done The Fugitive, which, would have won the Oscar if it wasn't for Schindler's List. He's done movies about American troops being done over by their own ex-special forces or people being fitted up for crimes and being pursued by the state. He's got a style. And in 1996, he released Chain Reaction, which we were saying before the show should be a good movie. It should be a good movie.
Mhm.
It's got a cast you would kill for. It's got some plot points that are relevant to the modern day. And yet, something about this film doesn't work.
Everything about this film doesn't work
Uh,
in just a slight way. Just it's
it's
all just slightly off.
yeah, it's not that it's a bad movie, although it is a bad movie. It's a movie where you can possibly see a good movie if something was different and you can't work out what it is, although we may find out as we go through this episode today. First thoughts on this movie, guys. I'm being stared at.
Well, where do you start? Um, for me, obviously, like this is a movie that I remember being quite obsessed with as a teen because obviously, Keanu, Rachel Weisz, I mean, you just had to be into it and didn't quite have the critical thinking skills to see the ways in which it really didn't work. But watching it now in 2023, it's like, wow, it really shows that it's pre 9/11. And yet so many things are still the same. So the opening monologue from Morgan Freeman is about how we're a planet addicted to oil and we need to find new types of energy. And then it's all about institutional power refusing to do the technological advancements and make the drastic shifts necessary to address runaway climate change. And then there's things like, what if we make the whole plot revolve around our protagonists being framed as terrorists, but it's pre 9/11, so that's not like as terrifying as it's almost wacky. It's almost like, wow, we're being framed as terrorists in cahoots with the Chinese government. Wow. As opposed to like how that plot would play now.
Mm, mm.
yeah, I thought it was an interesting movie because it had a lot of like varied themes and it sort of, I think it tried to go in too many directions.
Mm.
But yeah, it's really interesting that you can really tell it's in a pre 9/11 world because the protagonist just escapes by taking public transport and is not spotted somehow.
This this
Like
this is
makes
a
no effort
green
to
this
like
is a
cut
green
his
movie.
hair.
They use trains, they use
Yeah,
boats, they use those
yeah,
fucking swamp craft thing.
yeah,
Like this is
yeah.
a pro green energy movie.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
First thing that always strikes me about this movie is how fucking cold it is. Like Andrew Davis is from Chicago and he films a lot of his movies in Chicago. And he filmed this one in like December and January up by the Great Lakes, which means there were points it was like minus 20 during filming. And boy, does it show, because everyone looks fucking miserable a lot of the time. They just all look absolutely freezing.
But also, it's that mid-90s thing where, like, instead of it being freezing cold, so everyone's like kind of rugged up and looks comfy and snug, everyone just looks miserable in a coat that's 5 sizes too big.
There's also a preponderance of plaid shirts in this movie. You know, loose ones tucked into the pants. Like, I think there's a scene at one point where, like, it seems like everyone just goes and puts one on, just for the vibe of what's going on. I mean, we've mentioned some of the cast. Like I said, this movie has a great cast. It's got Rachel Weisz, it's got Keanu Reeves, it's got Morgan Freeman, it's got Fred Ward, like Kevin Dunn, who is the guy you look at and you're just like, oh yeah, that's the dad from the Transformers movie. I've seen him and stuff before. You know, he's the general from the bad Godzilla movie from the 90s.
Oh yeah.
It's also got Z Martin as well, who you kind of, when you see him, you're just like, it's that dude. He's like the dad in Rush Hour. Yeah, there he is. And this is like him, like
the guy who's in everything.
Like, he is that kind of character, and also because he's one of the few characters in the movie who is not either like white or African American. He is also the guy who gets murdered, which I also found very interesting. Anyway, and it's a good cast. You've got some real heavyweights in there, which is good because it doesn't hold together as a movie properly. It's a lot of bits of other movies that get jammed together around the plot.
You didn't even mention Brian Cox as well.
Oh, did I forget Brian Cox? You know what? I literally have forgotten to add him into the little list I have here. Yeah, Brian Cox is in this movie, and Brian Cox attempts to steal this movie via
the scenery.
Yeah, via chewing all of the scenery. It's incredible. Also, baby Michael Shannon, who looks so incredibly young when he pops up in this film.
But still so tall. Like, I had this moment of, how did he get cast? Because it's a bit role. He's got like one line of dialogue. You know it's him if you see him, but it's kind of like, how did you cast such an intensely striking, intensely tall young man for this bit role?
We know who's in the movie. We kind of know when the movie's happening. The movie opens with a kind of voiceover from Dr. Alistair, who's running this hydrogen energy project. And he says, we're running out of time. We've polluted and peopled this planet to the brink of extinction. We're destroying our world at a suicidal pace. We need a pollution revolution. And it's not going to be easy because the world is addicted to petroleum. We have limited resources and we go to war to protect them. We need a new technology, and this technology can't be sold. It must be given away to everyone. We are in sight of a dream. There is a solution. The answer is all around us right here. And he's like, hey, did you know that water contains hydrogen? And if we can get the hydrogen out of there, like, we can power the city of Chicago for a week with just this glass of water. And again, like, this is like, the movie opens with a statement, which is, hey guys, if we don't do something about the planet, we're all going to be fucked. And this is 1996. He could have made that speech this year. In fact, somebody somewhere probably did make that speech this year.
It's also one of the things that dates the movie, though, because it's such a mid-90s thing to just literally open with a character you have not been introduced to setting out the political thesis of the film. Post 9/11 again, like, we got too cynical for that. You couldn't just be like, so here's the state of geopolitics as the opening lines of your movie, which most people there are 14-year-olds who think Keanu Reeves is cool. Yeah, that was a thing that just hit differently. Just very like, really? Are we still here? Could this have dated poorly? I would have liked this bit of the film to date poorly instead of effectively opening with a TED talk.
Because he was talking about pollution, not climate change. That's dates it, you know, because back then it was just, we just need to stop the polluters, man. It's fine. We don't have to worry about anything else. Whereas, you know, the argument has shifted and changed over time, let's say. So this is obviously
it's still carbon pollution.
Yeah, it's the same deal, man. It's just kind of the 90s lingo that goes around it. So kind of the movie opens and you've got these shots over like the south side of Chicago, which, one, kind of like post-industrial hellscape, two, fucking cold. You've got the big smokestacks going and all this, and you zoom in on where they're running this hydrogen energy project, which is in like an old foundry or something. You know, it's kind of got this, like, it's an available space and we're going to use it.
But it also has to be in the middle of like a completely depopulated part of the industrial zone, because when, spoiler alert, it blows up 15 minutes into the movie, it's apparently clearing like 8 city blocks, but there are no fatalities. except for like the one guy who you knew was in the building where it
He
happened.
didn't even get killed by the accident, technically. So.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's possibly the largest and safest explosion that the US has experienced since the atomic bomb testing goes
Well,
off.
and it looked like an atomic bomb as well, with the whole mushroom crowd when it blew up. It's like,
Yeah,
I don't think hydrogen blows up like that.
I really appreciated the hydrogen exploding in a way which allowed Keanu Reeves to drive away from it on a motorbike on ice and not fall off. Like, goddamn, that's some considerate energy. That's why clean energy is the future, because when it tries to kill you, it gives you a chance.
Yeah.
So we are introduced to kind of a cast of nerds essentially, and one of them is Keanu Reeves, Eddie, and Eddie has rocked up to this testing of the hydrogen energy maker with an integral part of the machine which he is machining in his apartment, and then strapping this precision piece of equipment for an energy test involving lasers to the back of his motorbike and driving it through the city of Chicago
he does wrap it in his shirt.
He does wrap it in a shirt, which, you know, I respect him for that. But a bit of me was like, this is a high precision kind of bit of equipment, and he's just like, whoop, whack it on the back of the bike, mate. Let's go.
Well, what I found funny is that later, sorry, I'm just jumping ahead because I'm an awful person. But later, he's lathing something in his apartment, but he's not looking at the lathe. He's just left it running. He's not moving any part. It's like, what are you making? How is this working?
He's a very 90s dude. You know, he's got the plaid shirt. He's got the keyboard in his apartment for no reason whatsoever. Like, it's never explained in the movie why he has that, but it's just there. So we're introduced to them. We're also introduced to Paul Shannon, played by Morgan Freeman, and whoever in the wardrobe department is dressing Morgan Freeman in this movie earned their money. There is not a single scene where he is not dripped out, like with a pork pie hat. He's got the silk kind of scarves on. He's always got like an unlit cigar. It just this is kind of peak Morgan Freeman looking incredible in this film.
That's how it also is a 90s movie, because you wouldn't see that much smoking these days.
Yeah. Although he never actually, I don't think he lights it.
It's never lit. He's just walking through scene after scene in the presence of hydrogen generating scientific mumbo jumbo with an unlit cigar. And I'm like, are you taunting God?
He takes puffs on it during the board meetings when he's not around the hydrogen.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe it's like realistic that way.
So we get to see them try and focus. They make a bubble in the water, and then they shoot a laser at the bubble, and then power comes out, except it doesn't work because the machine gets too jumpy. It's like the vibes are all wrong. The machine is bouncing up and down like one of those bucking bronco machines. And they're like, oh well, we're going to have to try again another way. Alistair, the guy in charge of it, or the old guy, the dreamer, the one who has given the speech about we need free energy for everyone, is like, it's fine, guys. We haven't failed. We've just found another way not to succeed. And you're like, cool. Like, he's the moral center of the movie. There is something about like possibly the first 20-25 minutes of this film, which is Keanu Reeves doesn't talk. He barely speaks. And so he goes home and he's doing the machining that Steph was talking about. He's got like he's got the little machine. The lathe is going and it makes a sound and it lights up the machine, because apparently this thing can operate all by itself, which again, sure, fine. And he's like, and then he gets his keyboard because he probably plays in a band, and he makes the sound, and he's like, okay, that's the frequency. Cool. And then he solved the problem, but he does it with, there is no, because he's all by himself in the scene. There's no speech there. It's just him kind of going, huh, and that's it. And that's how the world gets free energy in this world, is Keanu Reeves like pinky plonks on a keyboard for a few minutes, and suddenly everything's fine.
So they don't have a coherent idea of what the science is. And I'm just thinking about it, it reminds me of later seasons of a lot of those CW superhero shows like The Flash, where every season Barry just has to run faster, and every season of Arrow, Oliver just has to shoot a better arrow. But there's a point in all of those shows where you can hold on to like the 3 or 4 plots and the 3 or 4 bad guys they've had, but at some point it just becomes, well, we need to do the binky bonk to stop the binky bonk from binky bonking. And it's just words, and that's how the tech in this works. It's like, why does it need sound? Why does it need a bubble? Why does it glow? Why is it a frequency? If it's a frequency that is audible and playable on a commercial keyboard, how have they not just like found it by running scales? None of this makes sense. All you need to know is that the binky bonk has been solved by the dude who's clearly highly technically educated but is constantly coded as working class. And that's how we get free energy.
Yeah, we get free energy from some guy who rides a motorbike and looks pretty cool, playing on his keyboard, which is actually kind of, I think that's what people thought Britpop was in the 90s. So, you know, it kind of works as a theory. So they make it work, and everyone's just like, oh my God, we just sold free energy, goddamn. And this is the point where I think everyone puts their plaid shirt on, and almost everyone decides to immediately get completely drunk off their ass.
I mean,
and drive home.
Yeah, yeah. There's a bit where they're all drinking, and Keanu Reeves and Rachel Weisz kind of vaguely don't interact because they barely interact up until a scene a little bit later. But meanwhile, there is an argument going on because Morgan Freeman's character Paul Shannon is kind of overseeing from the Moore Foundation, who provides these guys with money, and he's having an argument with the visionary. He's just like, "Look, we can't just share this with everybody. China will have it." I think he mentions Mandela as well.
Yes, Mandela's the first person he says.
He says Mandela will have it. And I'm just like, dude, what's your fucking deal with Nelson Mandela? Like, you can't give Nelson Mandela free energy. It's like, what?
No, I distinctly, because it's the first thing he says.
Yeah, Mandela will get this information. China will find out. And I'm just like, Nelson, God, imagine if you gave Nelson Mandela free energy. Like, you'd never have got the World Cup off the Springboks after 95. But it's yeah, he's like, oh, you shouldn't do this. And he's like, okay, fine. You know, I disagree with you. We'll talk about it later. We're going to send all the information out to all the other people who are working on this. And obviously, these are 90s computers. So, you know, I think one of the lines is, you should get all of the stuff in about 6 hours. And I'm just like, in my brain, all I could hear was
dial-up sounds.
Which also...
And it's early enough that they just say, we need to get this information onto the internet.
Yes, just the internet.
There's no platform, there's no app. It's on the internet.
There was also a point later in this movie where 90s internet could have ended the film there. So Rachel Weisz decides to indulge in some drunk driving. She gets out, she comes out, she's drunk, she gets into a car, it won't start. And she's like, Keanu Reeves is like, hey, why don't I take you on my much safer motorbike in the ice? And she's like, yeah, no, let's go and get a bus because this movie loves good modes of public transport. So he drops her off home and she's staying at Alistair's house because she's visiting from the UK because she's ever so British. This could have been played as kind of a budding romance scene. It is not. There is nothing going on there.
Nothing. She passes out on bed and he like laughs and then turns around and sees how many degrees she has on the wall because she's brought her degrees and put them up on the wall of the friend's house she's staying at. And he goes, whoa, because he's Keanu Reeves. And
unbeknownst to Keanu, a big like UPS van full of baddies has ominous
asbestos removal.
Brilliant. More green, healthy kind of like stuff going on there. They kind of menacingly roll in like, again, you know, where they're pulling this scene from like Die Hard and any number of movies where the bad guys show up. And Alistair and Chen, and they're getting information, and then Chen goes to see what's wrong and exits the movie for an unspecified period of time. At which point, Keanu comes back and sees that all of the lights are flashing because the Pinky Bonk machine has gone Binky Bonk. And it's all very bad. He tries to do chest compressions on a man who has obviously been suffocated to death with a plastic bag. Which, you know, I'm looking forward to people hearing a Greens parliamentary candidate laugh at the extrajudicial assassination of a scientist who's discovered green energy. Wow, Fran. Wow, buddy. But yeah,
it's an awkward laugh.
I'm laughing at the CPR, not the assassination.
He attempts to resuscitate him and then runs around for a few seconds. And again, I think his only line is Jan. I even have it written down like 3 times in my notes because I'm like, it's the loudest he's been all movie. And it's one of the first times I've seen with him engage emotionally with another character rather than just, yes, I did this. Then it blows up in a calm and orderly manner.
Spectacularly blows up. It's a good, like, particularly for mid-90s, it's a pretty good explosion effect.
Yeah.
Well, it's practical effects as well. They use practical effects to do some of it, and then you can see where it splits to that kind of
blue screen.
Yeah, Halo.
It was the 90s
kind of
kid.
Halo on the Xbox kind of graphics for an explosion where it's kind of just this moving wall. But, you know, Keanu survives. Good for him. You know, good for him.
Well, I was always going to survive. I mean, quick movie otherwise.
You know what?
But he is not a cool guy because he does look at the explosion.
He does. He does look at the explosion. Just again laughing at, and Nelson Mandela does not get the free energy. And Morgan Freeman is happy about this because he hates Nelson Mandela with a passion. So, yeah, again, there is lots of stuff that happens in this movie, but again, I will emphasize how cold everyone looks in it. Like Keanu Reeves riding his motorbike across ice with no helmet on to escape an explosion. Like the motorbike skids and he somehow does not just instantly die because, you know, he's protected by plot. He's got a plot helmet on, which means he can't get hurt. It cuts to the next morning and there is a search team. Did you guys watch the search team, guys? You know, when it cuts to them, like it cuts to the scene where the FBI turn up and Morgan Freeman's there and he's dressed amazingly. But there's some search team guys in like firemen's outfits in this scene. And they've got like poles and stuff. And they are not searching. They are kind of poking bricks to see if the bricks move. In this scene, they are like in the background of one shot. It's like that scene from the Daniel Craig Bond movie where the guy is sweeping the floor, but the broom is like 8 inches above the floor. These guys are like just poking at rocks to see what the rock is. And it just completely threw me for a minute because I was like, well, I'm glad that no one actually did die in the explosion or anyone survived because, goddamn, these guys are not going to help them. And into the movie comes Fred Ward. You know, he's the guy you love to see. If you love Tremors, you love Fred Ward. The FBI turn up because one thing that Andrew Davis loves is the FBI and the US Marshals and the cops. Except in this movie, there's a very clear hierarchy, which is, I think, what Steph was talking about earlier with what Fran was talking about with there's too many plot threads here. In this movie, cops, stupid and victims most of the time, but trying to do a good job. FBI, our brave heroes and the only people who are willing to protect us. CIA, devious bastard. He's trying to create like a hierarchy, you know, of law enforcement eugenicism or something where he's just got like, oh, you can trust these ones, but you can't trust those ones. And yet,
but he also tries to do a bit of a twist where, like, initially it's the FBI who are the bad ones because they're the ones who think that Eddie and Lily are terrorists.
Yeah.
But then it turns out that actually it's the CIA and the FBI are the ones who go, wait, this is an obvious frame-up, except that the FBI are also being tipped off to everything by the bad guys who work for the CIA. So all cops are bastards.
Almost everyone gets interviewed. They get interviewed by the FBI. Everyone's asking them lots of questions. Morgan Freeman is sat there chewing on his cigar in front of these FBI guys, looking like as completely unruffled as only a spook can. You know, he's just like, yeah, sure, whatever. This is not going to bother me. They search Keanu's apartment. They find a burst radar, and they find $250,000 in cash, and they find like manuals in Chinese. Which is, again, this is like the 90s thing, which is, you know, it's back now, but it's like, oh, well, you can't trust the Chinese because they're fiendish and they, you know, they might have paid people off. They are the real enemy now.
But that's the thing. It's less like they're worrying because they're a superpower who are trying to exercise all of the soft power in the Asia-Pacific region. It's still just more like, well, they're foreign, therefore suspicious. Is kind of the logic to it. Like, there's no sense
like
of
Mandela.
Government, or exactly.
I can't believe this movie takes such a big swing at Nelson Mandela for no reason. But again,
maybe Morgan and Mandela like don't get along. Maybe.
Well, he played him. He played him in Invictus about 15 years later as well.
But that was years later, so maybe they'd made up at that point.
Morgan Freeman being like, God damn, I hate Nelson Mandela so much. I'm going to smear him in this movie. So we get through the kind of the FBI interrogating them and going, oh yeah, well, it's obviously the missing Chinese guy because he's the only guy who's missing, because that can be the only explanation. And
after an explosion that leveled 8 city blocks.
Yes, and the president rang the FBI director at 3 a.m. and being like, yo, what's going on? Which you know, sure, like you can just blow up 8 blocks of Chicago and everyone's like, yeah, that's annoying. We'll just put 2 FBI guys on it. Because that, they have the team and stuff, but it just appears that there are just 2 agents who are irresponsible for working out what the hell has just happened in
Well, because all the
Chicago.
other agents spend all their time on screen just sassing each other.
They
Like
really
when
do.
they're searching at his apartment, one of them's like, "I'll go check that room," and another one's just like, "Don't hurt yourself." And then another one's looking at the weird little generator thing he's got on his desk and is like, "Haha, it's a new cappuccino machine." I'm like,
That's
guys,
because the FBI are fun dudes in this movie. They're the ones you're not meant to dislike. The thing about this movie is, if you want to have someone who's falsely accused of crimes like Keanu Reeves is about to be, you need them to have more of an outraged kind of persona to be able to present on screen, rather than kind of a passive whoa response to it. Now, again, this is Andrew Davis. He really wanted to make this movie with Tommy Lee Jones and Harrison Ford. I'm fucking certain of it, because Harrison Ford would have fucking eaten this movie up. But he couldn't, because he'd already done that, and he's just like, okay, I'll just put this. I'll just put this like this guy. He'll do the job. He'll do the job. Did you guys notice how they use news in this movie?
a little.
How they use news. So like the scene after the explosion, they've got like the people being interviewed with the TV crews and stuff, and it gives you like the so and so is missing and blah blah blah, and there are no survivors, and it's this much and blah 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 blah. And then later in the when Keanu's in the car, he clicks on the radio news, and it's them talking about like Alistair, who's been killed, and describing him as an eccentric Renaissance genius and all this sort of thing,
And they're constantly playing his TED talk.
Yeah, and they're playing his stuff all over. Yeah, TED Talks before TED Talks, but it's kind of a real like, we have to move this story forward, but we don't have senior plot exposition to come in and do that, so we just have to have a bit of news in the background, which brings us to a bridge. There's a bridge in this movie, and
yeah,
I think
it's quite a long bridge scene, the bridge escape scene.
I genuinely think that the bridge scene, like as the first like big kind of action hero set piece, is incredible.
It's an amazing chase scene. It would be amazing if you put it in a movie now, and no one remembered Chain Reaction, because no one remembers Chain Reaction.
But he gets chased, like him and Rachel Weisz are in a cafe, and on the TV news up coming their pictures, and a dude who's paying attention to everything around him in the bar, because that's what you do. It's like, hey, I recognize you. And then he gets chased by the cops and the FBI and goons, because we're not allowed, we don't know they're CIA yet, but we kind of suspect they are. And Keanu Reeves climbs up a bridge as it's rising, then kind of swings round and outwits the cops by basically just going back down back the same way he came.
And escaping in a rubbish truck, because he's constantly coded as working class.
Yeah, he gets out, but it's that they're all down at the bottom of the bridge. They go up to search the bridge, but by the time they have, he's snuck around behind them, which is again a big comment on the competency of Chicago PD.
Well, they just wave the vehicles that have been parked at the end of the bridge off. They're just waving at the dump truck, being like, "Get off the bridge." It's like, are you not going to search the giant dump truck?
Like, there's nothing in there. Don't worry about it. It's fine.
But it is a great chase scene, and it does give you those real kind of, how's he going to get into this or out of this pickle right now situation, because they've actually thought, okay, we're going to have boats in the water, and the water's going to be freezing, and he can't jump across because he's not actually Neo yet, and
he's not Neo or
really
John
good.
Wick yet.
He's not Neo, he's not John Wick, he's not even he's not even Bill S. Preston or Ted Theodore Logan at this point. He's just kind of a slightly, I mean, if you check the trivia on this, the reason that Keanu does not look as angular as he normally does in this movie is that before filming, he hurt himself playing a game of pickup hockey, and therefore couldn't exercise because he messed up his shoulder and his back. So he's looking pretty normal. He doesn't look like chiseled and angular. He just looks like some
and
dude.
He's running like a normal person. He's running the way a nerd machinist who lives in his apartment playing keyboard runs. He's not Tom Cruise running.
He gets his cardio in this movie, though. He does a lot of running.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He does a lot of running.
Once he's going, he can just go. That's the most implausible thing about the bridge chase scene, is it's like, there have been a lot of cops in cars after you for several city blocks now, and there's been no like they get caught in traffic B-roll. So how are you still ahead of them?
Again, it's just a comment on the driving skills of the brave boys of the Chicago Police Department.
They don't really want to catch them. That's, unpaid overtime.
Yeah. So then we get mode of public transport number 2, because to escape, they escape on a train, which is great. Rachel Weisz has gone to the station, got tickets. He rocks up. They get on the train. There's a train conductor because having a decent staffing number of people on trains is important and actually very good for providing an effective service. And they get on the train.
But this is where there's the first sign of them having zero chemistry, but the movie kind of treating them as though they do, because she's pacing the platform up and down, and obviously she's nervous because she thinks they're going to be charged with terrorism. The train conductor misreads it and is like, "Don't worry, honey, he'll be here." And then Keanu Reeves runs towards her, and she turns to the train conductor, is like, "You were right," with like a happy smile on her face. But it's like, but this isn't a romantic scene. She doesn't have romantic feelings for him. They barely know each other, even though they've been working on this project together. What is this vibe you're trying to make me feel?
I have down at this point, whispering into George W. Bush's ear, Brian Cox has impacted the movie. Because at this point, Brian Cox pops up, and he was not the first choice for this role. The first choice for this role was Tommy Lee Jones, because Andrew Davis loves working with Tommy Lee Jones. So Brian Cox... That
would have been a weird fucking choice.
It would have, but Tommy Lee Jones has the menace to pull it off, and Brian Cox has a different kind of menace in this movie.
In the first scene when he's talking to Morgan Freeman, he pauses mid-sentence to put like a gummy bear in his mouth and then finish his sentence with a meaningful pause. Like, that is how you know this man is the villain of the movie.
And his accent is interstate is possibly the best way to put it. Like interstate, yes, but also interstate. He's kind of got a southern drawl that occasionally disappears and turns into something harder. And then eventually a little bit of Scottish comes out when he gets real mad. And it just, even the phrasing, if somebody's going down for this, it is not going to be I. And I'm just like, dude, what the fuck? Who talks like that? What are you doing?
That is someone who was a complete like word nerd at high school, and they were so proud of the fact that they knew that you don't use the freaking accusative case after the verb to be, and that stuck with him his whole life. If he asks people how they're feeling and they say good, he corrects them and says, "I think you mean well." That's this guy.
He's the guy who never gets in the 10 items or fewer or 10 items or less queue at the supermarket out of fucking principle. He refuses to. So we've had vague politics in this movie. Yeah, it turns out like Morgan Freeman's character knows Brian Cox's character. They're actually kind of in this together. Now, we know that now. And we're now expected to watch Keanu Reeves kind of work this out over a period of time, which makes any kind of discovery on his part that this is happening completely fucking moot, because we already knew. There's not a twist there. It's just, we now know this, which again is possibly one of the problems with this movie, in that Morgan Freeman is a trusted actor. When you see him turn up in a movie, you're just like, fuck yeah, it's Morgan Freeman. You don't expect him to be, as he is in this movie. Brian Cox is the villain. Morgan Freeman is the bad guy in this film. He's the bad guy. He does bad things in this movie, and he is proud of the bad things he does. He even has a nice little speech at the end about it. He's the bad guy.
And the speech makes it feel like the movie's not quite sure if you're meant to hate him. But this actually says to me, after watching it, I was like, you can tell, and I'm pretty sure the IMDb trivia backs me up, they often were not working with a script. They had not figured out their plot beats. They had not figured out when revelations were happening. And actually earlier, a really good example of this is when they get this fax that's supposedly from Lu Chen, the missing Chinese scientist, telling Rachel Weisz to meet him at the Shanghai rendezvous. And she's like, "This isn't from Lu. That isn't how he writes." And it's like, do you also mean like there isn't a Shanghai rendezvous? Because that might be a bigger clue than just his writing style. But after that, you're still meant to go through like 10, 15 minutes of the FBI slowly coming around to frame Eddie. It's like, no. You've already done the they're being framed plot point with no emotional impact to it whatsoever, except that Rachel Weisz tries to sell the hell out of the line and in the movie forgets she did it. It's all completely out of order. Like there's no building of tension. Oh God, we're being framed. Now we're on the run. It just kind of keeps jumping back and forth as to, and yeah, the revelation about just how much of a bad guy Morgan Freeman is kind of scattered and in the wrong order.
Yeah, it's like we forgot the scene before the train station, before the bridge, and all this, where Fred Ward is just like, "Yo, who the hell is this guy?" And they do a brief CV of Morgan Freeman's character, Paul Shannon. It's like, Georgetown Law, Kennedy School of Government, worked for several aerospace giants, 3 years in Washington under Reagan, working at DARPA. And at that point, I am Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at the screen, going, "Bad guy, bad guy." You don't get to do that in one of these movies without being a bad guy.
And then the movie kind of forgets it.
Yeah, maybe that's why he hates Mandela. He was like a Reagan administration.
It was actually brilliant characterization. You
are so it right. Was like actually. Yeah. So
knew what they were doing.
Oh, damn.
It's deeper than you think.
So they escape and they go somewhere else. And they go and see his friend Maggie, who he went to college with, but it's never properly explained. There's also zero chemistry between them as well. It's just basically next location. They go to next location and there's like an observatory and stuff. And
it's cool. It's a cool shot. Observatories look cool.
Yeah, they always look nice.
And that's the end of it.
She goes on the internet, which, like, if you go on today, would have just gotten them tracked and got right there. But it's the 90s and no one knows how to do that yet.
But also, they clearly don't know how the internet looks, because there's multiple things of Rachel Weisz on the internet finding things out. And there's a point where she's clearly meant to uncover some kind of information and just goes, "Oh no." And it could not be clearer that she is looking at a blank screen. She does not know what she's reacting to. She does not know what she's meant to be seeing. She's just going, "Revelation."
The computer itself also makes that real 90s beep noise, that, you know, that one where you turn it on and it would just load up and then go beep as loud as possible. And that's while she's using it, which is usually, you know, you remember with the old PC units where you'd mess something up and when it hit a critical fault, it would just make a beep noise to tell you to leave it alone. And she's like, beep. Oh no. That's the scene. Also,
I also don't think it's ever meaningful to the plot what she finds on the internet. Like at some point, I think she's finding out stuff about Morgan Freeman, but they're in the middle of a chase scene, so Eddie is bundling her out the door.
I actually have the note on that. I know the thing that she finds. The thing that she finds is that the facts from Shanghai actually came via the American Technological Business Council out there, and I'm just like, CIA field office, baby. You know, it's like, because they're like, the minute it's like the American Technological Business Council, you're just like, cool. And how many people have they killed this month? But yeah, there was also the script point where they meet Maggie, and Maggie's like, "Tell me you didn't do it, Eddie." And he goes, "I didn't do it." And she's like, "Oh, it's so good to see you." And I'm like, cool.
So
your buddy's on the news as a wanted terrorist, and he's just like, "Tell me you didn't do it." "I didn't do it." "Oh, cool, we're over. Like,
but also, she's the person they're going to when, like, Alistair's been murdered and their experiment's been blown up. So she's clearly a trusted person, but her first question is, "I'm not actually sure whether or not you murdered Alistair and blew up 8 city blocks."
Mm-hmm. We also get, we now get actual politics in the movie because Paul Shannon goes before a Senate committee about the explosion in Chicago and discusses... can you give me an assurance that this event will never happen again? And he's like, "No, the incident in Chicago was tragic, but sometimes that is the price we pay to ensure our competitive edge in the future. We didn't intend to pay for the space exploration program with the lives of 10 American astronauts, but we did. Nevertheless, we must not waver in our commitment to scientific research and development." And here's the 9/11 line. "As you gentlemen know, there are many threats to our way of life, and not all of them wear uniforms and carry guns." And that's the end of his speech. And I'm just like, oh, that line's going to come back to bite everyone in the ass in about 5 years.
Is the direct implication that the CIA murdered 11 NASA astronauts?
Look, we didn't want to kill them, but they saw what the moon was made out of.
That scene also makes no sense because it's also kind of the introduction of Brian Cox's character, and the FBI agents have been snuck into the hearing somehow, but nothing happens except that Morgan Freeman delivers a sinister political speech.
They're like sat next to each other as well, aren't they? Fred Ward sat there and Brian Cox is just like sat there, like simmering gently.
And I could not find the actress. I looked on IMDb, but the woman sitting next to Brian Cox has like this very short platinum pixie cut and intensely dark eyeliner. And I was like, she is a henchman. That character is a henchman. She could not more obviously be a henchman. And then she shows up later in the secret
She
villain
does.
base as a henchman.
She's got the scooshy spray which makes you go to sleep. Because it's just
so wacky.
Then the hearing, he's thanked for being a patriot because he's a fucking spook. And because we know that he's a spook, what Keanu Reeves now does from the audience perspective is the stupid thing, which is he gets Maggie to call Paul and then gets on the phone and calls Paul, and Paul is now at C Systems in Virginia. And I'm just like, lots of things in Virginia, huh? Linked to this movie. Nothing, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. There's nothing here. Don't worry about it. And she rings him there, and he's on the phone with Brian Cox kind of looming in the background with like a little exclamation mark above his head. And you're like, uh-oh. They scramble the call, and Keanu Reeves tells Paul Shannon the stuff they found out about the American U.S. Technological Business Council, which is great because you're essentially telling him, yeah, we know what you guys did. Which again, there's no weight to it because you're just like, you fucking idiot. Why did you do that? Like, you didn't.
But it's not even in there's not even Morgan Freeman doing a reaction shot of, oh no, they know too much. It's just like information is shared, and then he does what he would have done anyway in terms of setting them up to bring them in.
Yeah. There's then a funny beat, which is Maggie tries to misdirect the cops as to where they're going. Goes, I saw him run that way, and the cop just looks at her and goes, "Really, Maggie?" like, really, I'm sick of your bullshit. This is not the first time she has tried to misdirect the cops in that area.
It's the best character development in the entire movie. Is just the local cops know Maggie is a troublemaker and do not fucking believe her. Amazing.
At which point, the janitor from Scrubs enters the movie.
And the dad from Mean Girls.
Oh, yeah, of course. God damn. Sorry. Yeah. It's been a while.
They're not allowed to go out when they're grounded?
They go up on the roof, and he's there, and he's like, yo, surrender now. At which point a helicopter turns up, and a high-powered rifle murders the policeman. Now, Keanu Reeves takes this opportunity to, one, not realize he's getting shot at, but two, removes the officer's sidearm from him, therefore making it absolutely clear to the police that he has shot this guy with a high-powered rifle round from a handgun through a Kevlar vest, it turns out. And you just go, the increasingly poor decisions of Keanu Reeves in this movie is all I'm getting here. It's just like, as the movie goes on, he becomes less and less relevant to the plot. Like, he didn't find this stuff out. She did. He just is kind of there to exist while things happen around him.
He's there to be the action person because Rachel Weisz's character is incapable of taking any actual physical action off her own bat, with like one or two exceptions. Half the movie is Keanu Reeves grabbing Rachel Weisz's arm and dragging her off screen.
Yeah, Keanu Reeves also then gets into a swamp. They call it like swamp things, like those big fan.
I think it's called an airboat, but yeah, they use them in the Everglades.
Yeah, he gets in one and immediately demonstrates to everybody that he doesn't know how to drive it because he just goes around in circles for about a minute. Like, that shot is so long of him just going.
I thought it was quite funny.
And she gives him a look. She like turns behind to look behind her and is like, "What are you doing?" It's good. I love that bit.
Yeah, I love the trick he pulls as well of like adding the like weight on it so that the helicopter follows.
Yeah, the helicopter follows, and then they're just like, "Hey, he's not there," and then they just kind of leave it to disappear off into the distance. Like that
not even an explosion. Not even like hitting a rock in an explosion.
Just a very faint, like a mosquito going past your ear. Like, God, they do some light crime. They break and enter into a house, and there is a scene which in another movie which wanted there to be a romantic kind of relationship at all between the two main characters would have been played as kind of vaguely sexy scene or like a romantic scene, because Rachel Weisz is in the bath fully clothed and he's got the cold water in there to warm her up and stuff so she doesn't get hypothermia. And it's just, Fran, you pointed out the relationship dynamic between these two before we started. What do you think about how they present Keanu Reeves and Rachel Weisz in this movie?
It's familial, and even in the way that she says, is this how you get all the girls, or is this how you seduce all the women? It's not really like she's inviting a come on from him. It's like, oh, like
You're my cousin. Is this how you get almost the girls? Oh yeah, oh, is this how you get women?
Yeah.
Loser.
The one thing that actually annoyed me, because I actually thought it was kind of cool, because there's also a scene before that where he is ripping off her clothes and putting a blanket around her because she's going into shock, and it's completely unsexual, which worse movies would not have avoided. The thing that bugged me is, why is she the one collapsing in shock and he's still functioning pretty well when they were in the cold water for basically an identical amount of time?
It's because he's still wearing that plot motorbike armor from earlier in the movie. We've not seen
plaid shirt.
Yeah, the plaid shirt, honestly.
Is very insulating.
He's got long johns under the pants.
So now we jump from their plot thread back to the FBI working out that Paul Shannon, Morgan Freeman, is a spook, because they get in there and they're just like, yeah, we've been to Sea Systems. It used to be a government facility. Now the county record says it doesn't even exist. I just want to emphasize to anyone who hasn't seen this movie how fucking big this site is. To the point that they've got a massive excavation thing going on there that's the size of a fucking quarry because they had to use a quarry. And they're like, apparently this place doesn't exist. And it's got fucking state troopers guarding it, and the FBI are we can't get in there for any reason. Yeah, it kind of just cuts across from that scene. And then they kind of try and interview Morgan Freeman, which is bad because I like Fred Ward as an actor, but he's trying to interrogate Morgan Freeman, who is having far more fun in this movie than he is. Fred Ward is giving it 1,000%. He is trying his best, but Morgan Freeman is just completely composed. And, it's a mismatch of talent. On a scale I have not seen.
It's such a boringly, and maybe I can't remember, maybe in 96 this wasn't such an obviously played out kind of police or FBI interrogation scene, but it's constantly the law enforcement officers are asking the stupidest questions and they're just getting pushed back, and instead of, I don't know, applying the repressive power of the state, they just kind of make little concerned ooh-woo faces and then never actually push anyone on any point that could be disproven or catch anyone out in the lie. It's just it's a purely dramatic scene.
Except
that doesn't function like any conversation.
There is some deep ideology at the end of this scene. The end of this scene is incredible because it's Fred Ward going, I'd be forgiven. Your foundation's a front for the CIA. And Morgan Freeman's like, well, there might be national security issues that are bigger than all of us. And Fred Ward says, national security does not include murdering people, domestically at least. Tell your friends at Langley that domestic is our backyard. You're not allowed to play here. And I'm just like, citation fucking needed for that line. Literally, no. The FBI's job is to kill people here. Your job is to kill people over there. And it just, there's these little spikes a bit throughout the movie just going, well, the CIA are bad guys because they kill people overseas, but the FBI are good guys. And
Look, the CIA are bad guys because they're meant to kill people overseas, but they keep killing people here. And that is a demarcation line that the union will not tolerate. There is apparently a whole scene, it's not in the movie, but there's a whole version of one scene that just ends with Brian Cox singing because they had no script. So there's a bit where Paul Shannon and Lyman, Brian Cox's character, are walking down a corridor to an elevator. They had no script, and Andrew Davis was like, can you just improvise? And Morgan Freeman was like, I am so sick of this shit. I'm not taking part. So Brian Cox just monologues the whole way down. And because the cameras follow them into the elevator, Brian Cox just started singing because he'd run out of things to say.
I would die to see that footage.
Absolutely. But yeah, they had no working script. Oh, excuse me, my guinea pigs are screaming, so I'm just going to go on mute and give them some beans.
Righto. So yeah, they're cold. They're in the house. Some hired goons turn up, and Keanu Reeves just fucking smokes one of them.
Yeah.
Like straight up just shoots the guy dead in what is an incredibly badly shot and dark scene. Not dark as in thematically, just it's really hard to see what's going on. And then, wait, no, Rachel Weisz does something in this scene. She hits the other bad
she
guy
hits
with
the guy with that toilet thingy.
Is it a
The
toilet thing?
toilet thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's bullet of the cistern. Yeah. It's like her one moment of physical action.
Yeah.
Just absolutely cleans them out. And
but it's also kind of comedic, right? Like it's not like she asserts power or strength or anything. She's just like she's doing a comical Looney Tunes style takeout.
They decide to send flowers to Paul Shannon with a note attached because he is being surveilled by the FBI. He is a CIA operative, and they have decided to outwit all of them by sending him flowers with a note saying where to meet for a meeting.
But also outwitting his own staff, because the staff have like received the flowers, put them in a vase, carried them into his office, and then go, "Oh, this is a little out of order, sir. We're not sure who it's from," because they haven't even looked at the card. And I'm like, your boss is a very important CIA guy, and you're just bringing him random flowers like the second they're delivered.
I'm just saying, pre 9/11 terrorism was a fucking walk in the park. There are several points in this movie where like lots of bad things can very easily happen because nobody seems that bothered about it, and maybe that's one of the things that makes this movie kind of not sit right is the fact that there's kind of passion, but there's no intensity to it. You know, it's a very it's not quite bloodless, but there's just no. It all feels a bit weightless, you know, because they probably didn't have a script and because things keep jumping backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards.
It feels very conscious that it is a movie and that you know you're watching a movie. So you're never, even in like the most intense action scenes, there's never a sense of tension for the audience.
Yeah. The stakes are like, feels low, but high at the same time because you kind of already know that the Morgan's character Paul is like a high up guy, so he's not gonna lose. So, and you also kind of know that they're not gonna like kill off the two protagonists. It's like, well, what are you doing?
Yeah, it's kind of a clearing your name kind of movie, but also it's clearing your name, but the kind of thing he's got to clear his name from this like alleged kind of terrorism or being a foreign agent. And that's meant to be the thing that's important, not the fact that they've just discovered a way to create like infinite free fucking energy.
Yeah.
Which is kind of just, like we said, the binky bonk machine and stuff. And yet also that's a more interesting kind of part of it. And that comes back in later. But again, it's one of these, that's a different plot thread to kind of what's happening to Keanu Reeves in this movie. And that's a different plot thread to what's happening with Brian Cox and Morgan Freeman in this movie. And occasionally they kind of tie together briefly for a second.
Yeah.
And then they just spin off again and you kind of lose it a bit and you're just like, oh, yeah. It's like,
this is why you have scripts.
Yeah, I didn't notice that at the beginning when they're in the foundry doing the experiment, there's Lucas, the bald white dude, right? When the bad guy's leaving the asbestos van, he's in that van with them. And he's also in all the scenes at the end, and he's the guy who claims that he made it work.
Yeah.
But it took until right at the end of the movie for me to go, hey, that's the guy who was there earlier. Because it's just not...
Yeah, I didn't even know he was in the start.
Exactly, because you're just like, yeah, generic white dude, fine, whatever. But it's just kind of like, again, you're kind of missing things where you're like, this should matter. Like, if this guy has been working for both sides all along, surely this should matter. But it doesn't. It just doesn't matter.
And it's so weird because it's like, well, they've also kidnapped Chen and then they have to, get Lily and Eddie there as well. So it's like, so this Lukash guy was like there the whole time and didn't take notes or copy anyone's homework or bring useful information over. Like, how did he just wander out of the death trap in the beginning and end up in the villain base at the end?
There's
nothing.
There's also a bigger problem with this movie, which is the Moore Foundation, which is a CIA front, is funding Professor Alistair to do his hydrogen research in a crappy foundry using crappy equipment. Meanwhile, the CIA are building a fucking particle accelerator to do the same job in Virginia with some of the same staff, with far more money. And the point of the movie is, yeah, he worked it out. Now you just have to prove to the CIA it works so they can not let people have it.
It feels like there was some plot that just got shredded, or that they didn't script, or
Well, you can see it as a commentary on the wasteful nature of the military-industrial complex as well.
There we go.
Yes.
It's a deeply, deeply political movie.
Yeah.
The Criterion Collection reissue on this is going to be incredible. So all the plot threads kind of come together very briefly because Keanu Reeves meets up with Paul Shannon in a museum with Rachel Weisz there, and he's there to bring him in. And Morgan Freeman's there kind of with a couple of his dudes, but also Brian Cox kind of sends some of his dudes as well, because there are suddenly way too many obvious hench people around.
Mm-hmm.
And Keanu Reeves decides to hit them with a very large bone. He makes the kind of block tackle that you normally see in the NFL on a dude who is obviously bigger than him, and he sends this guy flying. So, those sardines that they ate when they were in that house earlier obviously had something in them that gave him, Popeye-style powers. But unfortunately, Rachel Weisz gets squirted in the face 3 times with a little spray and instantly passes out because there is no need for her to be in the plot anymore.
No, because she's not relevant.
She needs to be moved. She needs to be moved to final location.
The princess has to be in another castle.
So yeah, it's like, and this is it. He says, yeah, we've got to verify the experiment. The CIA need to know that it works. That's part of that scene, him saying, look, you've got to verify that you actually managed to make it work. And it's just like, why?
Well, obviously, I think they want to recreate the technology, but just keep it hidden and used for America. Because I feel like they destroyed all of the equipment and stuff from earlier, but they didn't. Because only Keanu knows the frequency or something.
Yeah.
So they can't make the hydrogen thing work otherwise.
Because in this world, on this life-changing world-changing experiment, nobody takes notes. But
they can't just keep playing different frequencies till they find the right one.
And Alistair and Lou were uploading all of the data. There's no suggestion that only Eddie knows what the frequency is.
Yes, exactly.
Once they've done the experiment. And did he not say it? Did he secretly type it into a keypad like it was his freaking bank PIN number?
Oh my God! There is a point right at the beginning where it kind of creates the environment where obviously he's the only guy who would know. Because Rachel Weisz says to him, did you model this on the computer last night? He said, no, I spent that time building it. So he's too cool for computers, man.
Working class. Yeah, he's not a thinker. He's a doer who's generating advanced parts.
I don't need any woke computer modeling to do my science, man. Mine's the real stuff. I play a keyboard. Do you play a keyboard?
And this is the 90s internet as well. So even if they were uploading it would have taken several hours.
Yes.
Into the morning. So maybe it was destroyed before it got uploaded to the dial-up internet.
Rachel Weisz wakes up at C Systems and Brian Cox is creepy to her. Here you are, darling. Drink this. You're dehydrated. Wash it out of your system.
That scene could be so much creepier in a better movie, but because it's so bloodless, it's how is Brian Cox eating gummy bears with a southern accent offering you water? Not the creepiest thing you've ever heard.
And at this point, Dr. Chen is reintroduced with a black eye because he's obviously been beaten to extract the information that he probably doesn't have from them. And the creepiest bit of this scene is you've got all these scientists at this boardroom table, and she's talking to Brian Cox, and she says, do you drug and kidnap everyone whose work you admire? And Brian Cox goes, no, Dr. Barkley we left behind, the guy they assassinated with the bag. And all of the scientists at the table chuckle.
They all giggle.
They all giggle. And it's just ugh, fuck. Now, is this setting up to, we don't mind if these guys blow up later, which I don't think they do, but also it's kind of you've got Brian Cox being we kill people, ha ha ha. And everyone at the table is just ha ha ha. He's a genius, and we murdered him. Oh, Keanu Reeves does some more good working class hero stuff because he's inspired by a homeless man to jump into a cop car. He searches a license. He infiltrates C systems by putting on a hard hat and a high vis. And again, working class coded.
Well, this is my thing. Like, I kind of liked how he sees the unhoused guy and realizes he can basically be invisible by looking like he's homeless because the cops won't be looking for him. And then a couple of scenes later, he gets the invisibility of the working class by putting on a hard hat so none of the security guards notice that he's this highly wanted person. And I'm like, I thought that this was making a clever point, but I just think they used the same gimmick twice.
Oh, also in the in-between in the in-between scene, the FBI are just like, hey, somebody's taking us for a fool here. This whole thing stinks. This guy doesn't look like he doesn't look like he's about to kill the guy and blow everything up. Teflon sniper round, throw a vest, I don't buy it. And at that point, Fred Ward's is like $100 the kid didn't do it. And it's like, oh, so you've got a nationwide manhunt for an innocent man, and he's just like, yeah, make sure no one shoots him. It's just like, some things about America just don't change.
Yeah, again, it's a bit different these days, that line.
Yeah. We are now at the denouement of the movie. C systems have their own bucking bronco barrel of water that you shoot lasers at, and it makes a bubble and energy. They have the Plinky Plonk machine, the Binky Bonk machine, and it's not working properly because it's unstable because nobody who's working there has got a keyboard in their house. So they don't understand. They can't carry a tune.
You don't have the frequency.
Relay.
Yeah. And one of the American scientists says it won't work without the right frequencies, at which point Dr. Chen says something in Chinese. And they go, what did he say? And Rachel Weisz goes, yeah, he says he's been trying to tell you that for days. And it's very interesting that in the script that I have here, the Chinese is not translated in any way or even included in the script. It's just like, it might as well have been makes foreign noises. What did he say?
Maybe it was ad-libbed.
He's got
I want to believe they let Seymour just ad-lib that, and fuck knows what.
They've got like he has. I don't think he's got any more lines in the movie. He's just there.
Yeah, I think he gets shot after that. Actually,
it's a little bit later because it's like we'll come back at 8:15 tomorrow morning because everybody needs to go sleepy bye-byes. They've got to seal the lab, etc., etc. And at this point, we get another completely wordless Keanu Reeves scene where he comes in, he programs it, he tests that it works, he goes away and disappears off to do something else, which we find out later. And again, it's like such an incredible, like it's the point of the movie. It's why he's there to do the thing, and he says nothing throughout it. And like the process of discovering it, there's just no dialogue there. And you're like, Fran, I know you said, you consider this movie to be a prequel to John Wick. The amount of script he has to use in this movie is probably slightly more than a John Wick movie, but only just. This is the movie where John Wick killed his first person.
Yeah. And the important thing he goes and do is to draft an email, basically. So
yes. So they can't. The C systems come back the next morning and it works. And Lucas is just saying, "Oh yeah, I figured it out all by myself." Blah, 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 blah. And he's like, "Yeah, it was me. I did it. I couldn't sleep and I heard this voice telling me, so I've made it work." And you're just like,
what I love is that Brian Cox clearly doesn't care. He's like, "It works. Hell yeah, we'll celebrate you." And Paul Shannon is just like, "Yeah, sure you did, bro. Yeah, I believe this. Totes."
Where are you going, Paul? I'm going to check this against the Chicago data. And I'm like, wait, 1 second. You've got the data from Chicago on a disk somewhere.
Exactly.
And you can't work out how to backform it, even though you've got people who were literally in the room when you did it. Like, again, the movie completely flubs on science so badly here. But Morgan Freeman goes to check it, and he goes into a room with a computer terminal that appears to be set into a desk. And there's Keanu, and he is sending emails to the cops saying, "I gave you all the clues, Mr. Policeman. Come and arrest me," etc., etc. And he's sending all the data via fax, I believe, as well.
But hilariously, if you look on the screen, he's also set himself up with a C Systems email address because it's coming from Eddie_K at csystems.com. So he has taken the time
to
to
set up
get
his own
admin
account.
privileges, to set up his own profile.
It's one
so he can
factor,
email.
one factor authentication back then. It was just like, you can set up an email account. Yeah, fine, bro. It's okay. I mean, this is the point again. This is what I said earlier. I'm going to come back to it. If someone in C Systems had picked up the phone at this point, Keanu's plan's ruined.
Mm-hmm. In fact, his plan depends on someone picking up the phone at the exact correct moment.
And this is where Brian Cox is the malevolent form of CIA violence in this movie. He is the one that gets people killed and enjoys doing it with his delightful Southern Belle accent. But in this scene, Morgan Freeman gives a speech, which is evil, mostly because I think it could probably come out of the mouths of quite a few people in 2023. He gets asked about it, and he's just like, it's like, oh yeah, who killed Alistair? And he's like, oh yeah, I made the decision. That's my job. That's what I'm paid to do. I'm paid to do dirty work people don't want to know about. People want to live in split level homes. They want microwave dinners and color TV. So again, we're doing the CIA is here to protect the working class.
Mm-hmm.
But then it gets worse. Then it gets climate denial. Like he turns from just evil CIA guy to what seems like about 25 years worth of anti-climate change discourse. This speech is essentially meant to be like the hanging opposite to the speech that Alistair gives at the beginning about how we desperately need to get off pollution and we need to get off petroleum and we need to be free. Because his speech is, Alistair was a dreamer, clean air, free energy, noble concepts, but we live on a planet that's addicted to petroleum. What happens if you dump free energy onto the market? World stock markets would plummet. Our own economy would collapse. Recession, unemployment, war. And you're just like, okay, pump the brakes there, buddy.
It's interesting to me because it's deeply political, but it's also framed in a very, it's framed as not being political. It's just like, these are just statements of life. It's your basic neoliberal rhetoric where like, that's just how economies work. And if the economy doesn't work, then bad things happen. And it's like, how is war breaking out when everyone has free energy? Like, I can see how war is breaking out if the United States has free energy and Nelson Mandela doesn't. But if everyone's got it, then it fundamentally shifts the settings of the economy. And his speech is not saying, I love capital and I love the 1% and we have to maintain the status quo so the rich can stay rich. But it is just kind of like, but if the rich weren't rich, that would be terrible just because it would be terrible. And that's a really, like, that's how they make him the bad guy, even though he's effectively just defending the capitalist status quo.
Yeah. Because it's the next bit is the world is speeding up too fast now, Eddie. Which I've got to say, from this perspective, is boy, are you not ready for what happens next? And it's we can't bury the technology. It's like, yeah, we let it out, but you let it out at a pace the world can absorb. And at this point, you just go, oh no, have I just spent like an hour and a half watching this for it to be? Yeah, sorry, we can't do free energy because it would make the market sad and.
The line would go down.
The line would be sad. It would go down. And that would be bad.
But he's not meant to be the good guy, so that.
But it's Morgan Freeman. You don't give Morgan Freeman a role like that unless you kind of want people to go, well, he's out of line, but he's right.
Yeah.
kind of,
That's the thing. All of the terrible politics, your brain just kind of glosses over them because Morgan Freeman is saying it.
And if you look at that, the two bad guys in the movie, violence and kind of the structural resistance to change are represented by Morgan Freeman in his comforting voiceover of Penguin movies kind of deal, and Brian Cox with his accent choices. It's just like, that guy's bad, but this guy's reasonable, but also bad.
Yeah.
But don't worry, he'll make the right decision when it comes down to it. The CIA will always eventually put down the violent ones to save the good people at the end of the day, which is essentially what happens, because Brian Cox is just like, haha, I've got you. Starts twirling his mustache. He's got an opera cloak. They take him down to the machine. He's like, make the fucking machine work. And it turns out that Keanu's rigged the machine. At which point, Dr. Chen has his last appearance in the movie where the machine is broken. It's going to explode. Bad things are going to happen. So on his way out, Brian Cox decides, I'm just going to shoot a minority. Why the fuck not? And just kind of just he doesn't say anything. He just shoots him. And Morgan Freeman has an incredible line read. Did you guys notice that? It was, he's like, for God's sake, Lyman. And then he looks and goes, that was totally unnecessary. And that's just to kind of
suddenly he cares about randomly killing people.
He's just straight up murdered a guy, and he's like, well, that was unnecessary. Fucking well done, Debbie Downer. You've really put a buzzkill on this massive explosion at a government site.
Well, does he actually kill Paul at the start, or was that Lyman? Does
Oh no, it was Brian Cox. It was Lyman. Lyman just shoots Chen and then threatens to kill Rachel Weisz. And then they're like, no, you can't fire your gun because there's too much hydrogen around now. Unlucky Chen, bro. If you'd just hung on for like 10 more seconds, like we'd have been fine. But they had to kill someone else. It had been a while since someone had been murdered in the movie. Because as far as I can tell, 6 people die in this film. 7. You've got Alistair. You've got Chen dies. The cop on the roof.
Yeah. 3 other dudes.
The dude Keanu kills. The 2 henchmen.
Yeah.
And Lyman. So it's got a surprisingly low body count. We were saying before recording, Brian Cox is a Bond villain who does not get his own cat to stroke in this movie. So there is a 20-minute countdown, which I noted down here. I was like, 20 minutes? Fuck, I hope this movie does not go on for another 20 minutes. They're like, oh no, in 20 minutes it's going to blow. Let's slowly walk away from the explosion. Brian Cox seals them all in, blah, blah, blah. They escape, blah, blah, blah. Morgan Freeman and Brian Cox have a scene involving a lift, which I'm assuming is the one where Brian starts singing in one of them. And it is very interesting that, like you said, Morgan Freeman doesn't speak in the lift scene until right at the end. They get in the
his
lift.
Badass finishing move.
Yeah, because Brian Cox is like, oh, maybe it's time we thought about retirement. But what would we do? What would we do? And then the lift keeps going up, and then there's 2 gunshots, and you're like, oh no. And then Morgan Freeman walks out and goes, sorry, Lyman, your retirement was already prearranged. And you're just like,
and again, where is the political plot line that would make this all make sense?
Yeah. Well, they kind of had a discussion about, when it comes to it, Morgan Freeman's like, no, I will deal with this problem. And yeah, he does, but not in a way which is coherent enough to make sense.
Again, you wish you felt like those things were connected.
Yeah. Keanu Reeves uses his plaid shirt to make sure the axe doesn't make sparks. So that thing is good for wrapping sensitive equipment, stopping you from getting hypothermia, and will also prevent sparks when you're using a metal axe on some metal in a room full of hydrogen. So
working class hero.
Good news
to MacGyver their way out of an explosive situation. Good
news for plaid shirts.
It's the precursor to the bulletproof shirts in John Wick. So
that's it. He just was like, look, man, they're a little bit too heavy. I need something lightweight under the suit because otherwise I'm going to sweat too much. They escape. They go up in a very slow lift. They get blown out of it by the explosion, but somehow do not get turned into a marinara mist. Yeah.
Of all the movie, that's the bit where I was like, oh, come on.
Also, when they kind of came out of the thing, they were all covered in dust, very 9/11 vibes. And then, literally the next scene, they're completely clean again as they get into the helicopter, which is...
I will also say, though, working class hero moment, because they're hitting the buzzer to get the lift to come back down, and the foreman and a couple other guys in high-vis who are up the top who know the thing's about to explode are like, no, we have to go back there. No one gets
I thought you
behind.
said there was no one down there.
And there are. There's still 2 goons who get vaporized, but who cares about them?
They had it coming. There's just lots of and then he's like, oh, hi, to the FBI guys. Yeah, I'll go with you now. And they're just like, yeah, I knew I liked this kid.
And then there's the last moment of romantic tension where he's like, oh yeah, she's in with me or something.
Yeah, Dr. Sinclair and I ride together.
He calls her Dr. Sinclair because suddenly someone remembered that she's actually a very well-educated physicist.
And also, he really cares about her enough to use her proper title. Because that's the budding romance. And then it cuts to Morgan Freeman in the back of a long black like chauffeur-driven car, sitting next to John Travolta's sister, plays his secretary. And he says, take a memo to the director of Central Intelligence, C system, no longer a viable entity, will be in contact. That's it. And then the last
How was
shot,
that a memo?
the last shot you get before the credits roll is of the car disappearing over a hill with an American flag on a pole, just gently blowing in the wind. Which I think I wrote down in my notes, oh, come the fuck on. Because off he goes to do more stuff, which is okay now because reasons. Did you guys watch the post credits?
No.
No, it's not a Marvel movie, so I didn't.
It's the mid-90s. They didn't have post credits.
There's kind of after the credits, it cuts to a shot from the helicopter of a massive fucking implosion on the ground as the entire fucking tourist thing implodes. And one of the FBI guys goes, whoa, and that's the movie. That's it.
It's fantastic.
It's a dude going, whoa, and that's it. The movie finishes there.
It's buck wild. It's amazing.
It's a strangely anti-Nelson Mandela film. That's what I'm taking away from this.
So I just have 3 random things in my notes that I want to cover. One, from the first scene, you can tell that Rachel Weisz is playing a nerd character because she has a single bobby pin in her hair holding her fringe back, and that what obviously makes her a Richard nerd and not gorgeous mid-90s Rachel Weisz. The other is that when in the post-explosion things, this is my favorite, just stupid bit where they hadn't figured out the science at all. In the post-explosion sequence, there's your news media there, and you hear a voiceover, which is, and I wrote this down because it was so stupid. They're basically like, the University of Chicago says that this was an experimental facility used for generating hydrogen fuel, but university officials say that's not supposed to be dangerous.
Hydrogen, not supposed to be dangerous. Yep.
Hydrogen, famously not a dangerous gas. And the only thing that I really hope was clever storytelling is that when they're all celebrating in the very first scene where they've made it work, because Keanu Reeves owns a keyboard, is that when they take the photo, so Alistair and Paul Shannon have been arguing about sending the data out, and Rachel Weisz comes in and is like, you can't argue, it's a great night, let's take a photo, and she's got a camera. It then cuts to Paul taking the photo, and I want to believe that that was clever characterization, where the reason he's the person taking the photo is so he, the CIA guy, is not in the photo of the victorious research team. I want to believe that that was like thought through as a clever little Easter egg.
I think it's also that won't have been a digital camera as well, so they're kind of in the situation where if it had been a digital camera, he could then have a picture so he knows everyone who's there. You know, and then that gets the wait, well, we found these people and this, but we're missing.
He's got to take that to a 1-hour photo place and get it developed. Kids, ask your parents.
He's clicking the back off it and rolling it up and putting it in the little tube. He's putting it in the little bit of paper with a sticky top and writing his address on it. Sticking it in the post box is, again, such a 90s vibe. Fran, what are your closing thoughts on this, the Citizen Kane of Keanu Reeves movies?
I feel like the movie wasn't bad enough to be like properly memeable. Like The Room, it's not quite bad enough to be The Room, but it's like, which is a shame because it could have had like a second life. It's just kind of boring. It's like meandering, follows too many plot threads. Well, apparently doesn't have a script, like you said, Steph. So
it really shows infinite plot threads. It's not iconic enough to be like an iconic bad 90s action thriller. Like it's not The Fugitive, you know.
Yeah.
It's not.
Does it pass
it's
the
not even Last
test?
Action Hero.
Does it pass the Bechdel test? I think there's only one. No, because there's Brian Cox has a secretary, and there's Rachel Weisz, and there's blonde henchman lady. But I don't think
there's Maggie at the observatory, but they don't ever interact with each
other.
But
they only talk about, they have a hug, but that's in the context of Eddie and Alistair dying. So I don't think it counts as passing the Bechdel test.
Okay.
Also,
so they don't talk after that.
No.
Okay. Well, fails it. There we go.
It's just kind of meh.
Yeah.
And it deserves to be so much more.
There's so much more that could be in there. I mean, like I got you guys on because obviously you're prospective politicians, and in the Green
so we
Party,
take it seriously.
and you do take it seriously, but like looking at the politics of this movie, as you said, you look at the statements which are made, which are clearly, you could take them out of the movie and the movie still holds together, but they are political statements which are made by the writer, and the director agrees with them enough to put them out there so you can see it. Things like, well, we can't do green energy because it would make the market sad, or actually the CIA are kind of bad, but only when they're doing domestic stuff, or oh, we can't possibly do that because, and this is it, at the end of the movie, they've sent out the free energy. He's done that, but also he just blew the place up. So did it get out? Like, there's no better thing here. I mean, I think I noted down the last thing that really happens in this movie is Eddie commits the biggest act of domestic terrorism against a CIA facility, or against an intelligence facility, until a plane slams into the Pentagon 5 years later, because he blows the fuck out of that thing.
Yep.
And you just go, oh.
But technically it didn't exist, so was it a crime?
True.
If you blow up a CIA black site, does it count? Is the question we're asking now.
But nobody sees it and it doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's fine. There was nothing there, and now there's an even bigger nothing there. There's actually more nothing because there's this big hole. Okay, that was Chain Reaction. I am so sorry, but also I'm not sorry. It's a good movie. I do enjoy it because I like watching something that I can look at and go.
It is that.
It just, again, like we said, if you made the same movie now, possibly even with the same director, with the same cast, it would be a better film.
Oh, it'd be such a good film.
I feel like the action sequences would be way better because they were very undercooked, and I feel like the movie, even with such an incoherent sort of plot, if the action sequences were tighter or there were more bad guys that were fighting, could have been better. Could have been John Wick properly.
I think you've got the issue of, like, you've got your big explosion, and then your next big set piece is on a very slowly opening bridge. And there's kind of 8 blocks, and bridge go up, bridge go down. Kind of and then the next big sequence is airboat chase on a frozen lake.
Yeah.
And then it's museum, and then it's the end of the movie.
Yeah.
So there's an explosion right at the end of the movie, but the big CGI explosion is right at the beginning. So the movie's ass backwards. You need the big kaboom at the beginning.
I forgot the thing I was going to say that I teased to you, I think, in DMs about this, which is I realized on Googling this that I had confused half the plot of this movie with 1996's other cold fusion action thriller starring Val Kilmer, the remake of The Saint. And the reason I confused them is because in that, the bad guy who's like generic former Soviet leader guy is Boris the Blade from Snatch.
Oh my God.
And so I have this iconic thing of him like holding, I don't know, a freaking lightning rod that's attached to a cold fusion reactor. I remember nothing else from that movie. But for some reason in my head, that was in this movie. So I was looking at the cast list being like, where is Boris the Blade? What's going on? And there you go. You've solved a like 25-year-old mystery in my head.
It's very strange that we got 2 movies about free energy.
Yeah.
Like 1 year after, like a year after each other. It was like the year that Deep Impact and Armageddon released at the same time. There was some,
or A Bug's Life and Ants.
Yes, there was some deep, like, kind of reckonings going on with apocalyptic visions in the 90s. If you know what I mean? Like, the Soviet Union's over, the end of history has begun. So a lot of the movies are, okay, so what's going to wipe us out now? Is it going to be free energy? Woo! Or is it going to be literally a big rock from the sky?
And then we get Independence Day, which is all like optimistic for the future. And then that all went horribly wrong for some reason in the early 2000s.
It blew up a lot of shit in the 90s.
Well, you could. It wasn't traumatic for Americans at that point. So thanks for having us on to watch this terrible fucking movie.
Yeah, it has been a pleasure. I look forward to editing this down to something that's vaguely coherent.
I think Fran will agree with me that you better be party voting green after what you've put us through.
Much like the editor of Chain Reaction, I have to try and work this into something that makes sense and doesn't have too many plot threads.
No, I think if it doesn't make sense, it's honoring the spirit of the movie.
Yeah, exactly. It's meta.
So we will all be back next week to spend our time dissecting the life and times of Nelson Mandela. It's been a pleasure having you. Thank you, Fran. Thank you, Steph. And best of luck for list rankings. Everybody rank them highly on the list.
Thanks.
All right. Good night, team. Bye.
Love your work. Catch you later. Bye.